Shalom, everyone, and welcome back to the second session of our half-day conference. This session, we're going to have a speaker, Dr. Boaz Cohen, and directly after that, we're going to have the, the panel of three speakers about rescue after the Holocaust. So we're not going to take a break. I think that we had enough breaks until now. So with that, I would like to go directly to introduce our first speaker. And I'm honored to introduce Dr. Cohen, who is an historian and head of the Holocaust Studies program at Western Galilee College in Akko, Israel. He's also an affiliated research fellow at the Center for Collective Violence, Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the UCL Institute for Advanced Studies in London. Dr. Cohen's work focuses on the post-war Jewish world, the development of Holocaust historiography and memory in social and cultural contexts, the agency of Holocaust survivors and their early testimonies, and the rehabilitation and early testimonies of child Holocaust survivors. His latest papers are about the Nazi war against the Jewish child and Israeli Holocaust memory and the Cold War. He's co-founder with Dr. Verena Buzer, who will be speaking a little later, of the Children of War, Holocaust, and Genocide Project. And with that, Dr. Cohen, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the organizers, Meidin. I think this is a wonderful conference. I am indeed speaking here between two classes, so I've squashed this inside. And one class, classes of the Holocaust Studies program, Western Galilee. I would like to start to talk about the rehabilitation of Jewish child survivors in Poland between 1944 and 47. So generally, the challenge is obvious. Most Jewish children in Eastern Europe certainly were murdered by the Nazis. We're talking about a survival rate of 11 to 2.5% of Jewish children. The Jewish children underwent a genocide. They were not a byproduct or collateral damage of a war, and there were many European children who were killed or affected as collateral damage of the adults' war. They were targeted for death, and therefore their experience is as it is. The challenge of rehabilitating these children, it was a major challenge for Jewish society. And actually we can see that everywhere where you have a Jewish community re-establishing itself, built from survivors, people who were hidden, people who were repatriants from the inner reaches of the USSR. These people, one of the first items on the agenda is what do we do with the children? Now, the children pose a very unique challenge for the adults because they are the question is how do we look at these children? How do we perceive the children? So on one hand, the children were seen as heroes. A Jewish child who survived the Holocaust, who outwitted the Germans, who is now the future of our nation. So in one sense, the children are put on a pedestal and being lionized. On the other hand, they pose the severe educational and behavioral challenges for society. These are children at risk. This is what we call today children at risk. Children who underwent the Holocaust and got alive to the end are children at risk, who to survive had to adopt all sorts of behaviors. So we have two different perceptions. We can see it very nicely so actually, do we see them as heroes or as ruffians? This is, I think this is the way I coin it. So there's an interesting discussion in 1945, September 1945. There is a seminar of the Jewish Historical Commission in Poland. And one of the speakers is Noé Gross. Noé Gross is the referent for children's issues. He's also publishing a post-war book of Jewish children's testimonies in his Buenos Aires, and he is also together with Marianska Hoffman does another book like that, The Children Accused in Poland. So he's saying he really sees the children as spiritually more mature, more capable of resistance, more balanced than before the war. They devise practical intellect, which in many cases and they help save their lives. And they display ethical and moral elements, heroism and strong will. So when you read, when you hear Noé Gross about the children, you go, wow, we have a real generation of heroes growing up. But his friends at this meeting, especially historian Philip Friedman, are not so convinced. They're saying, wait a minute, these children, this is too one-sided, too optimistic. These children definitely have psychological problems, internal conflicts because they were in a Christian environment. This very nice story about the children who are superheroes is not so convincing. Now, whatever the initial perception was, practically, these children are challenging the system, really challenging. So we can see in Elena Kichler tells us about a very acrimonious discussion she has with the head of the Jewish committee in Krakow, who wants to expel children who are Jewish survivor children who are placed in the fourth floor of the Jewish committee's home and are showing delinquent behavior. They're actually challenging the norms expected from them. I will elaborate. And he says we have to throw them out. Are we making all these efforts for young delinquents? And Lena Kichler tells him, what do you want from these children? They survived the war because of the same behaviors that you are now angry at them at. They lied to save their lives. They stole to survive. These were the weapons to which they owe their survival, she says. You can't come and say anything to them. So the children were truly challenging. Nathan, a 15-year-old child, he speaks in the documentary done on the Lena Kichler children. He says, after the war, I was all in pieces. I had to put myself together like a jigsaw puzzle. He talks about the behavior in the children's home of the older children, the ones who were in the partisans and the camps. And he says, we were people without mercy, completely without mercy. Cross us, you will pay the price, whether you're a teacher or another child. Move from my way. Nachum Bogner, who was a child in that group, talks about and then became an historian of children in his book In the Mercy of Strangers. He says in 1945 everyone came from a very bad place. They looked for families, they found none. That rage had to be expressed. Now, when the people who wanted to rehabilitate these children were looking at these children, they were angry. I mean, we're doing all this effort for you, and you remain delinquent. So Lena Kichler, she talked about the same Nathan, who was probably really the leader of the problematic children in this group. She says he has all the justification to blame humanity. They killed his mother, his father, his brother. They took his childhood. They made him an invalid. They took one of his eyes. He lost an eye in the partisan. And the wounds to his soul are even worse. His aggressiveness is a form of self-preservation. In one case, which Lena Kichler recounts, and the documentary, by the way, brings out very strongly. She talks about one of the caretakers hears a scuffle in the boy's room, and when she breaks into the room because the children do not allow her, she sees that they hanged one of the children. When they decided that he deserves to die, and they hanged him. Luckily, she came in time, and she saved him. Now, these boys, they were replicating the violence they saw during the war. Where in the camps in the forest, one of the child says, people like that were hanged by their legs in the camps. Another says about the partisans, those who did not obey the commander's orders were put down. Or in the camps, the veteran prisoners, through people like this who were asocial or not nice to their friends, they threw them on the barbed wire. So Kichler says these children who we have to rehabilitate, these children are carrying the Nazi poison in their veins. So the major effort is regaining trust. Now, there is a special issue, and this is interesting. The American Journal of Educational Sociology devotes a special issue in 1945 to the question of the Jew in Europe. And in that discussion, in that issue, Aryeh Tertakover, who was in charge of relief rehabilitation for the World Jewish Congress during the war, he talks about Jewish children, and he says, how can the child who witnessed to survive the inferno of Jewish life after Nazi domination be converted into a member of human society with more or less normal attitude, not only towards the Germans, even towards other nations? A child who is seeing the passive indifference of the surrounding populations, and in many cases the active participation in deeds of terror, must inevitably come to a realization that humanity is corrupt and foul. All humanity is corrupt and foul. No real cultural reconstruction will be possible unless this educational problem is solved. And actually, Tertakover was not speaking from experience because he did not work with these children. But the people who worked with the children, like Lena Kichler, Chasya Bielitska, who had Lena Kichler as the orphanage in Zakopane, and she gets the children out of Poland, and then they get to Eretz Israel through France. Chasya Bielitska is the leader of the first Koordinatia group of children. They were all talking about this. The issue is to regain their trust in people. And then, only when you regain their trust in people, then we have a chance to the good that is inherent in these children will appear. These children trusted no one. They never told us the truth, says Lena Kichler. They were sure telling the truth will harm them. Lying in deceit will save them. For them, even after the war is not over. They perceived everyone is evil unless he proves otherwise. So really educators like Bielitska, Chasya Bielitska, and others, they were talking about our main task is to do rehabilitation, is to bring back trust. And for trust, you need a lot of patience, much compassion, and love. Says Bielitska, unrestricted love, motherly love. We have to provide a ceaselessly warm home, warmth, and security. Each child has to feel that here you are king. I hugged them, I caressed them. This would not have been passed today, maybe in professional childcare, but it worked after the Holocaust. I hugged them, I caressed them, I held them in my arms. I woke up at any hour of the night when they needed me. I made each child feel that I was his or hers alone, but also reinforced the sense of family togetherness. This is something where you see both Lena Kichler and Hasia Bieliska talk about the orphanage as a family unit. I must say that as the years go by, in 1947 already, when there is an educators meeting of the leaders of children's home, directors of children's homes in Poland, people are talking about uh, giving children too much warmth, overcompensating for what they lost, and then children come into a feeling that they have special privileges, rights, favors. So, but this is really, I must say that it seems from that meeting notes, and also from what we see, this was not the common view. This generally it was not. Another central issue, of which we know much because of research by, for example, Joanna Michlitz and others, is the issue of reclaiming Jewish identity. Children look at their Jewish identity. The children who return to the Jewish people look at Jewish identity as a liability. We have Paula Weinstein saying, I did not want to return to Judaism. We have a lot of sources like this. I was Christian, I prayed, I believed. I did, I couldn't believe in the God of the Jews. He didn't help me, but Jesus helped me. The Jews were murdered and the Christians weren't. So what sort of God was this? Jesus is okay. He helps, he saves. And the God of the Jews does not care about his Jews. I would also say that probably the mother figure of Maria holding her son is very strong with the Jewish girls, at least in what we call the monastery girls, which are a major challenge for educators in children's homes. The children were afraid as of fire of the world Jew. It was almost seen as a crime to be a Jew. They denied being Jews. Some of them were saturated with anti-Semitism. Hasia Bielitzka tells of these girls who are crying on Passover. She hears the cries in the girls' rooms. The girls are weeping. We are here with the Jews, and Jesus will not forgive us. We are not going to church, and there's not one cross here. That means even girls who willingly returned to the Jewish people from the monasteries, that means they made a choice to rejoin the Jewish people. They were still carrying very strongly the convent education that they had. Now, what do we do with these children? For in Lena Kichler's children's home, the boys, there was a certain gendered issue. The girls were the convent girls, the monastery girls, and the boys were fighting them about this, because the girls would curse them as dirty Jews, and the boys will snatch their crosses and take them off will take their crosses and will threaten them with violence. Elena Kichler said, you can't discard children's faith with violence. For them, the faith is everything, their treasure. They believe their faith saved them. You can't fight the child's faith. And we see this all across the board in many places. I will not say that everywhere. Hasia Bielitzka said that by denying them what they believed in, I could only break them, not build them. And her way was to build an alternate identity of being Jewish by choice, or in believing in Am Israel, in the people of Israel, believing in Eretz Israel as being a large family, being a part of a home, of a nation. This is like choosing Judaism. She was like transferring their belief in Jesus to their belief in the Jewish people in the land of Israel, in the love of humanity. And she did not remove crosses initially. She did do some process that after some time the girls willingly packed their crosses, etc. We We even have we have one children's home in Poland that is nominally religious, which is the Żabrze Children's Home. And even there, children who we know from Ishayahu Drucker was an army chaplain. He brought in the boys to Żabrze, the children to Żabrze. So they had a fatherly, lenient approach. If a child would say, "I need to go to church," he'll take him to church. And this is a religious Jew. He will take him to church because he understood you can't fight heads on the child's identity. Okay, so this is another thing. How else do you build trust and build a new identity? You work on involving the children in running the children's home. So it's interesting that we see that many caretakers talk about having some sort of children's secretariat or children's court, which organizes the children's homes, and all members carried equal weight in making decisions. And all the children got more responsibilities and were like partners with Hasia or Nesia in working with the others. This has a pre-war roots with, of course, with Janusz Korczak, a concept of a children's court in his orphanage. I never found anything that shows us that the children that the educators knew exactly what happened with Korczak's orphanage and took it from there. But we see it all over across the board, and we actually have another source of inspiration, especially for orphanages and educators who are more socialist or even communist. And this is Anton Makarenko, a Soviet educator who ran a children's home for delinquent children. And he also did child management, involvement in the management of the home, and this became like his book, the pedagogical poem, like the spread around this idea. I must say that this generally the whole idea on of giving children a say in organizing the children's homes was not always that popular. It was very challenging for the staff. Already in Korczak's home, we have one of the madrichim, one of the guides who survived, talking about the amazing, enormous challenge to an educator in children's homes that is actually under the jurisdiction of the children's court. And also when we have this meeting in 1947 in Poland of the directors of children's homes, there's already a opposition to the whole concept again, because the staff feel demoralized, the class deprived of authority. I mean, the staff loses their authority if you give the authority to children. You have to be very strong and very clear to yourself about your goals to be able to give the children a say in running the place. But it is indeed something that we see that the educators are talking about is this idea of once the children are a part of the system, they don't have to fight it all the time. Another issue that was, we don't always think about this, children who went through the Holocaust, they didn't go to school. So we have children who for years weren't in a school. Younger children who were never in a school. Tartakover talks about this also in this journal. He talks about enforced illiteracy. It's enforced illiteracy. The Jewish people who is famous for its education, its erudition. We are having a whole generation on whom illiteracy was enforced. And we must do something about it. Otherwise, we'll have a generation that knows nothing and can do nothing. So we see that actually the educators put a lot of stock into the uh, schooling of the children, not only talking about like giving ideological education and giving hugs and warmth. They insist on schooling. So Hasia Bieliska, for example, says this was one issue about which I refused to compromise. I made compromises, but not about studying. This was a matter of principle. A child has to go to school, and this is your school. This is what we have, and this is where you will study. So it was a very strong position. Now we have to take into account that in Lodz, where Hasia Bieliska's children's home was, there was a chance at Jewish schooling. They could study with Jews. This issue of getting the children back to school was much more challenging when the schools available were Polish schools. So if we take, for example, Lena Kirchler has a whole odyssey or a whole adventure in trying to get the children into school. The local school, Zakopane, was generally an anti-Semitic region. People also cooperated or co-opted with the Germans to some degree. Schools would not take their children from the children's homes. It started with the schools not agreeing to do exams for the children to see what their level of schooling is, so that they can decide what class they'll go to. And she has to bring in the region supervisor of the education ministry to force the schools to test the children and see what classes they can study, and then accept the children into classes. And this was worked somehow until one day her children were the object of a pogrom by their classmates, not some scuffles and a few hits. We're talking about a running pogrom where the boys were attacked all the way from the school to the children's homes, and until the staff of the children's home intervened and stopped the attack. The school was quiet. The teachers did not intervene in this attack. And from that moment on, all the schooling had to be done in the children's homes. She couldn't send the children to the schools because the school was it was very violent. On the other hand, we must admit that children are open. Uh, Children are open to studying. They want to study. I remember I interviewed a girl from the Otvotsk children's homes where they filmed Unsere Kinder. And I asked her what they talked about in the children's home. What are the children talking with one another? So a major issue was school, studies, achievements. This was a major subject that they were busy with. And we see the same in Lublin, where you have a children's home and they decide to start teaching in the home itself, and the children are all taking part in renovating a class and fixing it up and organizing the furniture. Children want to study, some of them at least. Children want to study. So we have to remember all this story is taking place in a very volatile atmosphere. If we are talking post-war Poland, Kielce, anti-Semitism, I'm not coming from the government, by the way, because the government wants to prove that it can, the Jews do have a place in post-war Poland, and Jewish educational facilities get concessions that no other minority gets, on one hand. But the general atmosphere is volatile. You don't have to give Zionist education to the children. It's enough to go outside and to feel the attacks in the park, the attacks in the streets. The children don't have to take much convincing. I'm not saying that specific children it was okay for them, but and generally, uh, so all this story I'm talking about is happening in a very volatile time vis-a-vis the Jews, and also if we take into account those children remaining in Poland, also vis-a-vis the general political situation with the communists taking over. So we still didn't speak about all other issues, uh, all other issues that can be discussed here. The whole issue of sexuality, we don't know much about this, how this was addressed. I heard some people mentioning some delinquent behaviors appearing also in the sexual field, but I didn't see myself any sources like this. But it is obvious that some of the children were before the war, during the war, sorry, victims of abuse, and we do not know how this was navigated. Maybe also because this was not something that was talked about after the war, and I'm addressing mainly post-war sources, aftermath sources from the early years. Even so, we do hear later on about children who were abused in the hiding place by other Jews or in uh, hiding with the Polish rabbis by their saviors are their abusers, and this raises a lot of. So all this issue, how this played out, and how this influenced the rehabilitation of the children, I don't know. But this is certainly an issue to research. We have the whole issue of religiosity, Jewish religiosity. For example, I talked a lot about here, Elena Kichler and about Chassia. They came from traditional homes. I mean, Chassia is Shomer Tzair, but she came from a religious home, or in one way or another. And it was obvious for them that you need a Jewish tradition in the home. I think that Elena Kichler talks about the children visiting her after they are already in Israel and they become teenagers and they keep visiting her in her home and they see the candelabra for Shabbat, and they don't know about this in where they are being educated. So she feels that she must fill this void of a Jewish traditions. I'm not talking about Jewish law. We have the issue of mental health. We have no mental health professionals apart from Lena Kichler herself, who is studying, who was in the middle of a PhD in education psychology. We have no reports for mental health, uh, about mental health specialists or from mental health specialists in Eastern Europe. We do, on the other hand, in Britain, we have Anna Freud doing projects on the children, with the children. So a much more psychological language we can find in Britain. We have a group of psychologists from Eretz Israel going to Cyprus and meeting the children, mainly talking with the staff, not with the children, at least from what we see. And but there are not many child psychologists to go around, and generally the staff, from what we see, the staff all over feels that it can manage by itself. So we have no materials at all from the Eastern Europe that I know of. Again, what I saw, we do have some from Western Europe and Cyprus, but not too much. We didn't research the issue of children with disabilities. We know some children had disabilities because of the war. We know of tuberculosis as a major issue. Actually, Elena Kirchner's home was one of two. One was in Ravka, was specifically for children with tuberculosis, but they had to close it after an armed attack by Poles on the children's home. So these issues still have to be researched. When I talk about, I'll end by saying this. When I'm interviewed in the press about child rehabilitation, people say, wait a minute, you're an historian. What do you know about rehabilitation? I mean, this is not your field. Child rehabilitation belongs to the professionals. Uh, and, uh, and this is something that so I'm an historian of rehabilitation. I can talk about what I see. I was also an educator and a foster family. So I have this approach also. This belongs to my life. It is true. I have a comment. So this is something that there's still a lot of work to do, and there is still importance to find a way to join the discussions of the historians and the caretakers. This is what we do in the Children of Holocaust and Genocide Project. What Verena Buzer and I are doing once a year, we bring together caretakers working with war-affected children, be it Rwanda, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, and historians of child rehabilitation after the Holocaust. We put them in the same room for one day, and each learns from the other. I have a commentary I see on sexual abuse. We have modern research on sexual abuse. We have very strong research done also in the US, but at the time, what do we know at the time? Contemporary sources I couldn't find, and probably they are, but I didn't find them. So this is a challenge for other historians to do or to share with me your knowledge. And I'll end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Boaz Cohen, for introducing us to such an important subject and the many challenges the child survivors had to face after World War II. So I want to thank you again for your fascinating lecture.